Tim Steidten has frankly lost his complete mind. He has gone gaga for the Brazilians. He's over there. He's seeing them all. He's even finding ones that aren't even in Brazil anymore. He's hearing talks of ones in Shakhtar. He's like, I want that one as well. He's not going to rest, and I don't think we're going to rest until we see a jet pick with at least one, potentially two, hey, even three. He's obsessed with it, which means so are we. We're having to talk about it a lot, and we want to talk about it from different angles. We had Nathan from the Copa Club on a couple of days ago, and someone else who is heavily involved in the Copa Club. There's a video on the channel which we will fully shout out at the end, which we would highly recommend you go check out. Is our friend Cal, co-founder of Analytics United, data guru, all-round good lad, and more importantly for this, a West Ham fan who watches South American football. So, Cal, we obviously did the video with Nathan. We broke down the players a little bit, but let's talk about the specifics of how they'll get on at West Ham, how they would fit in, because, I don't watch it, and I know the vast majority of people who'll be watching this video won't be watching South American football. Will see the clips that get posted. However, first, and I haven't told you this was going to happen, and I've only, to be honest, just decided it's going to happen. I'm going to test you on some Brazilian stuff, just to check you definitely know what you're talking about. So, start for 10. What language they speak in over in Brazil?
Brazilian. No, Brazilian Portuguese, actually, technically. It's not the
Whoa!
same. It's not the same as Portuguese.
I would have accepted Portuguese, but so far so good. Maybe I'll test you throughout the video. But let's start with the big one, shall we? Luis Guilherme. How do you pronounce his name?
That works. That works.
Sure,
I
we'll go.
honestly, yeah, we'll just go with it.
Okay,
I
cool.
can't be wrong if I
Luigi.
don't say it.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, fair. Luigi. It's seeming more likely after being off again. It feels like it's actually getting there. We did have that big long conversation with Nathan, and there was a wonderful video on the Copper Club where you break it down in even more detail. But sort of top line to start talking about him, how do you feel about it as a transfer?
Yeah, really excited. Really, really excited. I think there's been a lot made of Palmeiras recently with Endrick obviously going to Real Madrid and Willian Esteval potentially going to Chelsea. I'm not sure if that's done or not, but it seems that that's the direction that he's heading in. And I think Luigi, as we've dubbed him, I quite like that, is probably the third in that trio and the one that's probably gone under the radar the most. But I don't think that's to say that he isn't as good. Maybe he won't hit quite the same levels, but he's certainly of a caliber that should get West Ham fans excited. I've also seen a lot of people like posting, "Oh, he's only got one goal or one assist from the wing or whatever." I think there's loads of caveats with that. A, he's been playing in the first team since he was 17. B, most of those appearances, it might say 20 appearances, but most of them are 10 minutes here or there off the bench because Abel Ferreira, who's the Palmeiras manager, is keen to bed them in gently. I think there was a lot of upset about Endrick and how infrequently he played, and eventually he started to play and they've got their rewards. So I think it's unfair to just look at the numbers, and that's kind of what Nath was brought on to do and did a great job of, is sort of deep diving into what his real strengths are. And I think, yeah, I'm excited. I mean, just watching him dribble is great fun. I think he's got the physical profile that means he should be able to handle the move over to Europe eventually. I wouldn't expect to see him in the starting lineup straight away, but I don't think that's what we need either when you've got Kudus and Bowen on the wing. But having someone who can cover both those positions and the number 10 and potentially number 8, I think would be a good development path for him. Having someone who can come in, get those minutes regularly by covering a number of positions, and if he hits the ceiling, then oh boy, we'll be getting a lot of money for him.
I guess that's the point, right? Is as much money as it is now. If it did work out, I mean, even if it started to look like it was probably working out, we could still probably very quickly make a large profit on him because it's not like the
Yeah,
olden days where Shevchenko is the greatest striker Europe's ever seen and moves for 30 million to Chelsea. No, like you get a player who looks a little bit like it's working out in Europe, and 60 mil more is just easy to come by a little bit.
100%.
But then specifically, then you've mentioned a couple of different positions. You mentioned him maybe playing more central, even deeper. Where would you think would be the sort of immediate places we would see him get game time?
Yeah, so I would imagine, given the state of the squad, and obviously this is all entirely dependent on what happens this summer. We know there's going to be a lot of ins and quite a
Yeah.
few outs as well, actually. But I think it looks like a smart move because I think when you have a young player like that, you don't want to throw them in to the first team straight away because the
Mm.
expectation, moving over, cultural change, blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of pressure to put on someone's shoulders. We're in a good position in that we have Bowen and Kudus, who I expect to start on the right and the left, respectively. And I think that works wonders because Luigi can develop. I'm going to have to call him Luigi forever now. Can develop under them, but also he can come on as a sub off the bench to replace either one of Bowen or Kudus, which means in theory he's getting double the amount of minutes off the bench because he's happy to come on and cover for more than one player. It's not just like, okay, we've got a striker on the bench and he comes on every game for 20 minutes to cover the striker. It's like, okay, it means that he can cover numerous players, but also it gives Lopetegui a more diversity in terms of what he wants to do in a game and what sort of changes he wants to effect. I would expect that we would probably see him most on the flanks, purely based on, like I say, we need depth there, we need cover there, because we've got 2 nailed on starters, but we don't have much around it. It's been a problem for a while. I also think as well, something that we've not had for a long time, and something that the squad, when Jack and I did our assessment for AU, we kind of looked at it as not what positions do we need, but what skills do we need? What assets does this squad lack? And I think speed was a big one of them. I think for a long time, we've had a couple of fast players, but not really. I wouldn't say Bowen's lights out quick. I think he's fast when he's got the ball at his feet and he can move quickly, but I wouldn't say that he's not bursting down the wing. Like, defenders can catch up with him quite frequently, I'd say. Kudus is different, but it's kind of the only one we have. Antonio's not as fast anymore. Danny Ings is definitely not fast. Cornet, I'm not sure exists. So having someone like Luigi off the bench who is rapid and also has an incredibly quick turn of pace, the burst that he has from a stationary position, when you like stand up a winger and it's that first step, the speed that he has, like he stood stationary, he's sort of shifting his shoulders and then he can just burst out, knock the ball away, and just he's gone, he's beyond you. So I think having someone like that who's always wanting to take on his man is also good, but with the pace as well is great. So someone who's happy to get to the byline. I think more consistently on the left, I would say, because he's left-footed, it makes more sense that he'll take you on the outside if he's playing out on the left. He has been used a lot more on the right recently at Palmeiras, but I think this is as much to do with how their squad is balanced at the minute, and that's where the minutes come. But I would say, personally, in terms of how I expect him to develop, my preference would be that he is an interior player. I think he is best at the number 10 spot or as one of the more advanced central midfielders. I say that because I think, as I say, he's comfortable playing on the left and on the right. He's very fast off the ball. He's good in tight spaces and he can beat a man, and he's got quite broad upper body strength and he's a great dribbler. If you put that in central areas, it's very difficult to defend against because he's quite happy to go either side of the defensive midfielder, and he could go to the right, he could go to the left, and if he's carrying in central areas, helping you break up the pitch, it means that you can go either way. You're not limited to we have to go down one side, or we have to go down this side because so and so, whatever. It just adds that sort of diversity, and I think getting him in and around the half spaces is where he's going to be most dangerous. And I think with the stuff that's going on with Paquetá, I think, to me, I see this as a smart move in that I think Luigi, depending on how he develops, could be either Kudus or Paquetá. He has the skills of both. When playing centrally, he's more Paquetá-like. He's a sort of combinative player. He likes to link up and have fast interchanges in the way that Paquetá does with Emerson. Luigi's developed those relationships in this Palmeiras side, and I'd imagine him to bring that to West Ham. And that's really exciting. But equally, the way that he's able to ride challenges out wide and just run and jump over tackles and sort of roll over the back of defenders and just stay on his feet, that's what we've seen Kudus do all season. So if he can continue those skills, come off the bench and make impact when he does, watching how Kudus does it, I mean, who better to learn from? A player that's come and in his debut season in the Premier League, making the transition from the Eredivisie to the Premier League, which we know that certain wingers have not been able to do so easily. Anthony, sorry. Just had a bit of a cough there. But yeah, I think watching Kudus on the training pitch and watching him from the sidelines and just see how he's handled that transition and taking his lead is perfect. And then, like I say, if you want to turn him into a Paquetá type, Paquetá's Brazilian. Great. Emerson can speak Brazilian. Like, he's going to bed in as well. And if we bring the other 20 Brazilians that Tim's obviously looking at as well, then we've kind of can field a national team. So he should be fine. I think it will be great. He's physically ready. He's technically ready. the squad is in a good place for him in the same way that we will benefit from having him. So I think, yeah, super excited. I think it's really, really positive.
What's the capital of Brazil?
Brasilia.
Oh, okay. I'm just starting to convince me you know what you're talking about. Most people would have said Rio there, but you've got it down. My geography GCSE, very excited. Two people we've been linked with since that video are Carlos Miguel and Vitão, is how I'm going to say it.
Vital, yeah, yeah.
Which, how do you feel about those? I mean, one's goal, the goalkeeper one is sort of kind of insane to me, given the fact that we've already got two, and then Wes Foderingham sort of was seemingly done, although hasn't been confirmed or anything. Actually, let's start with the goalkeeper. I mean, what do you think? What do you think of Carlos Miguel?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of way I'm looking at both, we'll talk about Carlos Miguel, but I think the reason that we're
Sure.
looking at these is that we have obvious starting 11 places that need to be filled. I'm thinking striker, I'm thinking left centre back, and depending on what happens with Paquetá, probably a central midfielder, because I imagine you put Kudus on the left and you have the sort of progressive midfielder role to fill. And I think that's where the bulk of the money is going to go. If we don't get the Paquetá sale, we have way less money than we thought, but we still have the same amount of work. We actually have more work because then you have to replace someone that you weren't sure if you're going to have to replace anyway with half of the pot. So I think it makes sense to be looking at these profiles of player to get the most value for money that you can in those squad positions, because the ceiling is potentially really high. Like if you bring them over for cheap and they actually do as well as you hope, then they're going to be competing for a first team place. They might break into the first team. You might be able to sell them. If they don't, they're at least good enough to be squad players. And you're getting them done on the cheap rather than having to pay a premium for a homegrown squad player or something like that. So I think that's the rationale. With the specifics of Carlos Miguel, it is an interesting one, as you say, because we've got Fabianski, we've got Areola, Foderingham on-ish, it seemed. But I wonder now if they've worked out the availability of Carlos Miguel and the price. I think 4 million euros is what we're seeing. I wonder if they're looking at that going, actually, a 25-year-old keeper, if he wants to come and he's happy to be backup, and then he'll be number 2 next season when Fabianski leaves, then that represents better value potentially, because if you bring Foderingham in as the backup, you have to replace him again in a few years because he's old. So if you get a 25-year-old, you could get 10 years out of him, really. If he was happy to just be a Premier League backup, maybe play in the cups here and there. If we get Europe, he might be the Europa keeper. So I see that. In terms of what he's really good at, he's a brilliant shot stopper. He consistently outperforms his XCG, I guess, expected conceded goals. I believe, I mean, it's a small sample size, of course, we have to caveat with that, but this season so far, he in 2024 is expected to have conceded 13.58 goals, and he's only conceded 6, which means he has single-handedly kept 7.5 goals out just by way of his shot stopping. He's also a shithouse. He's 6'8", so no need to worry about him not claiming crosses into the box because he's an absolute monster, which is something that's actually been a bit of a concern under Areola. I think he's a great shot stopper, as we all know, one of the best in the league, but he's not particularly good off his line. He's not very assertive in the box. He doesn't come out. He quite often flaps at things. He's one of the worst in the league in terms of claiming crosses. So if you think, okay, we've got Areola, what's he good at? Shot stopping. Okay, what's he not good at? Crosses into the box. And his launch distribution, his long passing is bad. Carlos Miguel is also a very good reflex shot stopper, but he's also massive. He's very good at claiming crosses, and he's one of the best in the Brazilian league in terms of the accuracy of his long distribution. So if like I say, the ceiling thing, it's like, okay, maybe he comes over and he's not as good as we hope, but he's fine as a backup. But if he comes over and does all the things that he's been doing in Brazil for West Ham, then you've got a real situation on your hands and a really good backup. I think the only concern is that his short passing has been a little bit wayward at times. There's a mistake in there. But again, I think with good coaching, you can get that out. He's still young for a keeper. We've got Xavi Valero, who is largely considered to be one of the best goalkeeping coaches in Europe. We've also got Lopetegui coming in, who was a goalkeeper himself. So I think in terms of getting the best out of him, I'd feel pretty confident. And if we brought him as a backup, I'd be really happy with it. Vital is the other one we want to talk about. As you mentioned at the top of the pod, Shakhtar, he's back on loan at Internacional because of the situation in Shakhtar going on. with the war in Ukraine. So he's been back in Brazil and he's been great. Again, another one who I'm really excited about. I think if I'm going to be completely honest, I think a lot of us that have watched him for a few years might have expected him to kick on a bit faster than he has. There was
Sure.
a time about 3 or so years ago when he was being linked with Barcelona. I think they were like days away from actually completing the signing, and it fell through. But he was captain of the Palmeiras under-20 side that won a lot. He's capped at youth levels for Brazil.
Mhm.
Really highly thought of, incredibly good on the ball. Decent on the ground, like in terms of, I think something that if anyone's been listening to mine and Jack's stuff recently, you'll have heard a lot about us wanting centre backs who are comfortable and incredibly competent defending wide areas because of how advanced the fullbacks are going to be in this Lopetegui system. You need someone who's going to be able to cover that space, and Vitão is great at that, so that's really positive. It's clear that the scouting team have assessed the needs of the system and are going out actively looking for players that are proven to be good at the things that we need. It's not just like, oh, their tackle percentage is good, or oh, their aerial duel's good. It's actually with the eyes, which can often be forgotten now with all this data stuff. It is still important, even though my whole thing is data. I don't just look at the numbers. I do watch the video as well, and that's the sort of thing that isn't reflected in just the data. It doesn't tell you
Yeah.
by looking at a percentage where those duels are happening. But upon watching, yeah, in terms of him getting over to cover that space and tackle wingers, he's really good at that. So yeah, again, another one that's really impressive. He's also got incredibly good long passing and really likes to switch, which again is something that Lopetegui seems to like to use. He'll try and build up in deep areas, drag the opposition over to one side of the pitch to defend, because we kept the ball there a lot. They overcommit. Then you have a player, whether it's a centre back, a defensive midfielder, or a fullback, who is capable of hitting switches, because the other side of the pitch is way more isolated than it was, and you find a Bowen out there, or you find a Kudus in acres of space, and that's how we break into the final third. So having a player that has that in his locker is really good. Again, similar to what I said about the goalkeeper, I think I wouldn't expect him to come in and start. But if he lives up to his potential, like I said, Barcelona was sniffing around. He was at one point thought to be one of, if not the best Brazilian centre-back prospect. And he's still young. The progression is not linear. Development is not linear. His path's not been as he would have expected, because he's gone to Shakhtar, which for most Brazilians is a dream move because of their track record of pumping Brazilians back out into Europe and getting massive moves. Who could have predicted a war? That will have absolutely messed up his whole development plan. What has he done? He's took it in his stride. He's gone back to Brazil. He's got back to the grind. He's developed again. He's proven himself at that level again. And I think it makes sense now. He's doing what he'd hoped to have done by getting a move to Europe should he come. But he's doing it a different way. And I think more than anything, you can look at his on-pitch performances and be really pleased, but I think that says a lot about his character as well. A lot of players would crumble in that situation, and he's sort of taken the challenge, stepped up, and the interest is back from Europe. So even just for that reason, I'd be quite happy for him to come. Maybe just because I've watched him for so long and it's really exciting. But no, genuinely, he is great. And as a backup, he'd be really good. The only other thing to say is that I think he's in the 99th percentile for progressive carries this season. For centre backs, I think he's averaging 3.5 a game in the Brazilian Serie A this season, which I think as well points to Mavropanos starting centre back up with a high ceiling that could eventually become Premier League quality, in the same stylistic mould as Mavropanos, who, as we know, loves to carry the ball into midfield, which is a great asset, because if there's not a pass on, you have a centre back who's happy to just carry into the space and open up new passing lanes. So yeah, really excited by him.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the development thing, for example, what he was just saying, is the idea of like the two I always come up with are, the first one is Harry Kane. Like Harry Kane, he was doing fine or whatever. It wasn't like Harry Kane was a bad striker or anything, but seemingly burst, to use Michael Rich, not to copyright Michael Rich or anything, burst onto the scene, like just seemingly out of nowhere to become like one of, if not the best striker in the Premier League during that period. And it felt like he went from being sort of like, yeah, he's a thing, to, oh my God, he's here, sort of thing. And there's that instantaneous, like, it's not necessarily always just a straight line. And the other one for me, which I think is semi-similar to this in a sense, although not the same, Ravel Morrison. How many
Yep.
times do we have to hear ex-players, ex-managers, everyone go, Ravel Morrison was by far the best player I had ever seen at his level. It was incredible. But because of off-the-field issues with Ravel Morrison, it was seemingly mostly his own troubles or people he was hanging around with or whatever, with this a literal war,
Yeah.
can stop you from reaching the goals. It's just because you have the potential doesn't mean you're going to reach them. But equally, just because you're not doesn't look like you're going to reach potential right now doesn't mean you'll never get there. And I
Yeah,
think
and
it's one of those things.
I think as well with the Shakhtar move, if anyone wants to go back and watch some footage of him, I would go and find, if you can, it was a Shakhtar versus Real Madrid game where Vital played at the back, and he was absolutely unbelievable. And if he's
Mm,
putting in a man of the match performance against Real Madrid in the Champions League a
yeah,
few years ago, I think that it's fair to say there's probably a player in there, and things have happened that are out of his control that have stunted that.
yeah,
I think if it hadn't happened, he wouldn't be at Shakhtar anymore because he would have been sold, as many Brazilian Shakhtar players have been, for a lot of money to a bigger club in Europe. Um, but yeah, I think shit happens. I think to call it shit is probably an understatement.
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, but going back to your home country, sort of grounding yourself, getting
Mm,
used to it, because it must have been traumatic for him out there. Of course, so
yeah,
it's a huge thing to deal with. So God, I think people might see it as if, oh, he's flopped, he's gone back to Brazil without looking into the context, and that means he must be useless. But I
yeah,
think it makes perfect sense. If you move away from home and you hate it, what's the first thing you do? You go home for a bit and
yeah.
get
And I
yourself
think
back on a level playing field.
exactly. And he was far away from home, young guy, probably had no family around him, and all of a sudden a war breaks out in your face. It's kind of a difficult thing to deal
Yeah.
with. And I think the other thing that I would say about both of those two, similarly, and I would have made a very similar argument to Fabrizio Bruno if we ended up following up on that one, which seems to have gone cold now. But
Yeah.
if we followed up on that one, is there's a lot of pressure and a lot of talk is happening right now about the idea of Steiden going out and finding gems about this is let's like don't get me wrong, Luigi, maybe that's one of them. He's gone out, he's spending 30 mil on a teenager from Brazil or anything. But actually when I think about some of the transfers that I think are most impressive about Bayer Leverkusen, just to use Leverkusen as the example for obvious reasons, it's
Hmm.
not necessarily going and buying Frimpong or going and getting, I mean, Nathan Teller was impressive, but still a
Yeah.
large amount of money. For me, it's going and finding someone like Andrich, who's like, I think he was 26 when he joined them. They signed him for what, 6-7 million pounds, something like that.
Yep.
And he's gone on to become this super important, really, really useful player for them. And that's kind of the gems that I'm looking for, because it's quite easy to go and spend a huge amount of money on a massive prospect. I do it every year on Football Manager. It's not the most difficult thing to do, right? But I mean, it's difficult to then hold your job on the line with it. But for me, what's more impressive is going out and finding those players. And if you can find value for someone who is, 25, 26, 24 in Vettel's case, or whatever, and you get them for good prices, and then they actually become not even the best players in your squad, just someone who is capable of holding down squad plays, especially in the Premier League, where a squad player charges a lot of money. That's a lot of money to get a Premier
Yeah.
League squad player. I think that's it. I think that's a huge, huge benefit. And if these are those sort of guys that we're looking for, then I'm all for it. I don't see any really negatives in that. Even if they're not quite perfect now, let's give them the time because they're not that old, and also additionally, they're not that much money by any stretch of the imagination.
No, 100%. And I'm glad you mentioned Robert Andrick as well, because it brings it a bit full circle. When I first started out doing all of this in 2021 during COVID and stuff, I tweeted on February 2nd, 2021, about Robert Andrick as a potential option as a backup and future replacement to Thomas Suchek. So, and now look at him.
There we go.
Look at
So
him.
we know about West Ham, but how many World Cups have Brazil won, Carl?
Oh, 5.
He knows his stuff.
I know
He
my
knows
shit.
his stuff. So then, say you're Tim Steiden, you're
Yep.
obsessed with Brazilians of all
Yep.
kinds, you want them all, you're desperate. Who are the ones that we should be looking out for? We don't have to go into any great detail on this. Just who are some names from the Brazilian league or some Brazilians around the world who you're like, this is a guy either would be perfect for West Ham, or just some names to concentrate on because we're now all thinking about Brazil non-stop. Who are
Yeah,
those
yeah.
boys that are going to become those names?
I'll give you 3. If you want a combative midfielder who can be very useful in progression, go and look at Anibal Moreno from Palmeiras as well, holding midfielder. He just moved over there. I was very keen on him when he was at Racing Club in Argentina, and he moved to Palmeiras and has hit the ground running. Fans love him. I think they call him the Bulldog. I mean, what's not to love? Yeah, he's just one of those aggressive South American central midfielders that wins the ball, snaps into challenges, but rarely makes fouls, but is also very good at getting the ball into the final third just by way of the accuracy and vision of his passing. If you want a slightly more progressive midfielder, not actually that dissimilar to Luis G in terms of his stylistic profile, he's a brilliant dribbler with excellent ball control, has been played out on the wing, but also I think is probably better in central areas as more of an interior 10 type situation. Then go and look at Bruno Zapelli. And I think he's actually Argentinian, but he's playing at Atletico Paranense. He's, again, really good. He was someone who came up really well in terms of numbers and the profile, I guess, that we built using data to try and find Paqueta replacements in terms of not replacements, but people who are showing that they might have the potential to fulfill Paqueta's role in the future if they continue to develop the way they are. They match up very similarly. All I would say is his out of possession work probably needs a little bit more work. But in terms of someone who's just very nice to watch and very tidy on the ball, definitely go check him out. And finally, we'll go for a young winger, Alisson Santana, 18-year-old winger, playing in Brazil. He's having his breakthrough season at the minute, contributing with goals and assists. Incredibly physical but rapid, sort of direct runner, incredibly good on the ball, but a real goal threat once he gets into the box as well. Not that dissimilar to the Kudus mold in the sort of physical, very upright, very quick, can beat his man, but once he's in the box, he's got a serious shot on him. So yeah, go check them out. Anibal Moreno, Bruno Zapelli, and Alisson Santana.
And where's he playing? The last one?
Oh gosh, it's either Botafogo or Atletico Mineiro. I've had a blank because I can just see him in the black and white.
The shirt. Black and white, fair, yeah. Very fair.
I want to say Atletico Mineiro, but I could be wrong.
Well, we can prove your Brazilian knowledge with one final question.
Yeah,
and that's, who is the greatest Brazilian player of all time?
Oof! Oh man, now you're really making me think. Do you know what? Can I give you two?
You can give me two.
Okay, vibes-wise, because this is when I first started to get into football, Ronaldinho. It has to be Dino, man. Like, he was just so fun. Like, just everything about him was great. It's the reason I got into South American football, because I was like, I want to see more of this guy. In fact, I want to see more of these guys. And then just went and tried to find as much of that. Reality is that Brazilian football doesn't look like that in the league. It's actually a lot grittier and a lot more dogged and a lot of aggression. And then I fell in love with that side of it instead. But every now and then you get a Luis G popping up or William Estevao, and it's like, oh yeah, now I remember why I'm here. But if I was going to go not just on vibes, but on a player who I admire and think is really impressive, and actually, I don't want to put Luis G on the spot too much, but I'd say stylistically has the potential to be very similar. Rivaldo, I think he's an absolute baller. One of my favourite profiles of midfielder in terms of the way that he can just manipulate the ball, make things happen. I think he's an outstanding footballer. And yeah, I would say if Luis G hits his absolute maximum potential, then that's what you're looking at.
Unfortunately, you're incorrect. The answer is, of course, Jeffrey Schlupp, who is the best from everywhere. That's the best. Cal, thank you very much. If you want more, like a deep dive, there is one on the Copper Club of Cal and from Nathan, who was on the channel a couple of days ago, which Gio did a video for as well. I'll put that at the end of this video if you want to go watch deep dive into Guillermo and a couple of the others, Luis G and a couple of the others. And of course, if he does end up signing, I'm sure there'll be stuff on analyticsunited.co.uk, not .com, of which Cal is a part of. And hey, if you like Cal, he's going to be on Hamalytics on the Patreon, patreon.com/HamishChat next week. It will be next week at some point. I don't know when. I'm going to be away, so I'm going to have to figure that out. But he will be there
we'll work it out.
Answering your questions. But thank you, Cal. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Good to be back.
For the Brazilian knowledge. And appreciate it, everyone. So subscribe, all that good stuff. See you later. Bye.
Bye.